right, we're almost there. And now we can roll. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Power Lounge. This is your place to hear authentic conversations from those who have power to share. My name is Amy Vaughan, and I am the owner and Chief Empowerment Officer of Together Digital, a diverse and collaborative community of women who work in digital and choose to share their knowledge, power, and connections. And today we are talking about helping you start the transformation of the transformative journey. I'm going to start over again, for the sake of my podcast editor and my own sanity.
All good.
I skipped a line. I've got vacation brain. All right, I'll start that again. My name is Amy Vaughan, and I am the owner and Chief Empowerment Officer of Together Digital, a diverse and collaborative community of women who choose to share their knowledge, power, and connections. Join the movement at www.togetherindigital.com. Today, we are here to help you start the transformative journey towards authentic leadership. And to help us along the way is Kristin Harper. She is the powerhouse behind Driven to Succeed LLC. As the CEO of its incredible award-winning global market research and consulting firm, Kristin is all about helping brands thrive and people succeed. With her visionary leadership, Driven to Succeed has experienced phenomenal growth since its humble beginnings as a solopreneur venture in 2018. Now it's a global force with 2 thriving divisions. And on top of it all, Kristin was recognized as the Ohio Minority Supplier Development Council in 2022, Supplier of the Year. She is truly a force, and we are so thrilled to have her here with us. Thank you for joining us today, Kristin.
Thanks for inviting me, Amy. I'm so glad to be here with you and your listening audience.
Yes. We are happy to have them here as well. We've got our live listening audience that if you all have questions at the end, we absolutely want to hear them. We're all about having those conversations. We're not just talking at you, we're talking with you. But Kristin, for the sake of our listeners, please give us a little bit more about yourself and your journey and how you came to be where you are today.
Absolutely. So I'm a classically trained brand manager who got my start at Procter & Gamble, then the Hershey Company, and then Cardinal Health, where I wrapped up my corporate career as a global VP of marketing. I have had the privilege and pleasure of leading global iconic brands like Crest, Oral-B, Hershey's Kisses, and that really is my love and my passion, helping brands to grow, whether it's from an innovation standpoint or whether it's driving more frequency or consumption or expanded basket sizes, clicking on that right digital ad in order to help grow sales and profit. The other thing that I love and have always loved is helping to develop people. And so that's what's birthed 2 divisions within my company, the Market Research Division, which is Imaginology, and then Kristin Harper and the Expert Collective, which is a grouping of diverse business owners and experts within leadership, emotional intelligence, D&I, as well as employee wellness and resilience. So I've been in business for, it'll be 4 years in November of this year, 2023. Time has absolutely flown, and I've loved every moment of it.
That's amazing. And what an incredible journey, getting that chance to kind of learn and grow as a leader within a corporate environment, then bringing it into your own kind of space and business. I'm going to dig into that more here in a little bit. But first, can you tell us about a moment in your leadership journey that really shaped the way that you view authentic leadership, kind of having lived both sides of this kind of corporate and entrepreneur life? I'm really curious.
Absolutely. I think back to some of the early days of being a manager of people, and that carries a tremendous responsibility. I actually did some research and found that less than 10% of employees are supervisors or managers of others. And so there's a pretty hefty responsibility that comes with leading others. I recall in one of my early managerial opportunities and roles where the company I was working at made a large acquisition. And as a mid-20-something-year-old, it felt like an arranged marriage. I underestimated how emotional an acquisition could be, and how emotional it was to integrate 2 teams. What
Yes.
made it so interesting is when you think about acquisitions, oftentimes they are incremental to what your company or your portfolio already has. And in this case, it was incremental and duplicative because both the organization I worked at and the company that was being acquired had the same type of teams.
Mhm.
They both had marketing teams, they both had sales teams, they both had other types of functions. And so the goal of acquisitions is really synergy,
Yeah.
is to identify what's incremental and then to trim the fat of what is duplicative. Getting back to authentic leadership and underestimating how emotional that would be. I didn't realize at the time that as a manager of people, your emotions trickle down to the team and
Yeah.
it affects individuals and it affects the team dynamic. Going through an acquisition, there were so in a integration of two different companies and teams, there were a lot of uncertainty. There was certainly a lot of change that was on the horizon. And ultimately, that led to a lot of vulnerability. And here's the thing, just because you have a title of a manager, supervisor, director, VP, even CEO, it doesn't mean that you're immune
Right.
to emotions because we're all people with humans and we're human and have emotions at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So what I realized is that my vulnerability, my uncertainty, that trickled down to the team, and I didn't do a good job then
Mhm.
of um, being thoughtful and being an emotionally intelligent leader. Fast forward many years later, similar situation, different company, different acquisition, different category. I learned from that first lesson, and I decided that I would be a more authentic and vulnerable leader. What did that mean for me? It meant that I would tell my team, I don't have all the answers. So that was kind of a moment of self awareness.
Mhm.
Authentic leadership also meant that I chose to be transparent with here's the information that I know, here's what I don't know, and we're going to work through this together. So it was facing a moment of change and uncertainty
Mhm.
with realism, with optimism,
Mhm.
with curiosity, but not necessarily a false sense of positivity.
Right.
But what I didn't do that second time around was I didn't use is the wrong word to use, but to say, but I didn't utilize my team to
Mhm.
kind of vet through my emotions. I
Ah.
worked those offline, right?
Mhm.
Um, and as a result, during an 18-month period when there was record high attrition
Yeah.
among employees, both voluntary and involuntary, because of the strategies I implemented and authentic leadership and working through our vision together as a team, not one person on my team left the company or my team. And so the outcome of authentic leadership was greater engagement and retention among the team.
Yeah. That's a great example. I mean, acquisition is it has huge impact. I mean, I haven't been on the brand side, but I worked within an agency and I worked on a lot of P&G brands and Pringles was one of them. So I still remember the day when I walked into work and my creative director's like, "Hey, so P&G just sold Pringles." I'm like, "What does this mean for me?" So it trickles down even into the vendors and the teams the people that help execute that work for branding. So it is a big impact, but obviously you have to think about what you can control. And I loved sort of the finer points you put on authentic leadership. And I love also how you just acknowledge that leaders don't lack feeling. Leaders feel. I think that's maybe part of where this imposter syndrome comes from when women come into roles of leadership and they think, well, I'm not supposed to be feeling things. I'm a leader. I'm supposed to lead. I'm supposed to show that smile. I'm supposed to be optimistic. I'm supposed to have all the answers. But the truth is that's not the case.
At all.
No leader is completely optimistic. No leader lacks feeling. No leader, has all of the answers. So I think, your definition of, allowing for transparency, vulnerability, realism, optimism, and curiosity are a great framework towards, working on providing authentic leadership. And then I'll say one last thing before we get to the next question, and that I think was also really important was you started to allude to the necessity for boundaries. I think that's one thing as you become a leader. It's not that you feel or emote less. It's just you learn how and where to emote, right? And it's not in the spaces and places that might be detrimental to your team, or to their psyche, or to their lack or their sense of security. So creating boundaries and safe spaces for yourself as a leader is so huge. So if you are somebody who's kind of emerging into a leadership role, I think that's some of the best advice anybody ever gave me, was finding a group of other peer leaders that I could talk to and work through stuff with, because you need that space outside of the walls of your office, outside of the earshot of fellow teammates, where you can kind of share these stresses, so that you can get through what you need to get through and you don't bring that baggage into the workspace.
Absolutely. And so much of what you just recapped and shared, Amy, is really the importance of engaging with peers or
Mhm.
people who are outside of the sphere of what you're going through, the situation, and people who have a fresh perspective, who aren't married to the outcomes.
Mm.
I talk about having a personal board of directors in my
Yes.
book, The Heart of a Leader. And a personal board of directors is Team You. It's Team Amy. It's Team Kristin. It's Team Kaylee. It's Team fill in the blank. And so that is so critical. I
Mhm.
thought that I was bonding with my team in that
Yeah.
scenario by being vulnerable, but it actually backfired.
Mhm.
And so it is important to create those boundaries, as you mentioned.
I love it. See, first question, we've already got, well, second question, technically, I guess. So much good advice. So much good advice. And I will say too, for our listeners, members or not of Together Digital, we offer peer groups. We do peer group matching. And I'm always floored at the people who don't take advantage of that, because it's something that's made for you. You apply and you get this group, you get a time and a date to meet. And there's so much value in that. So even if you're not a member, just going and looking for spaces and finding peers to sort of have that, I love that outside perspective, that aren't married to the outcome, because I'm the same way. Like wherever I work, whatever I do, I put my whole heart into it, and I do everything I can for the work, for my people, for my team. But at the same time, it's like sometimes you can get really married to the outcome of a situation, and that can be pretty detrimental and cause a lot of stress and anxiety. So I love that idea, the outside perspective. And it's definitely one of the reasons why we offer members peer groups, that personal board of directors. And members, if you're not using it, by all means use it. It's one of the best things you can do for yourself and your sanity. Was there anything else you wanted to add to like your definition of authentic leadership? You mentioned transparency, vulnerability, realism, optimism, curiosity. I think those are all great qualities. Do you have any others you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would just add awareness of self and
Mm.
awareness of others, organizations, and cultures.
Yeah.
That's so critical because the best leaders, in my opinion, have high EQ, high
Mhm.
emotional intelligence. And that EQ means being aware of how you feel, being aware of your personal triggers, uh,
Yes.
diving deeper into um, understanding, why is this coming up for me? Why am I feeling this way? And one of the ones that I often work on is impulse control. And
Uh-huh.
that relates to self-management. And for me, what that means is not responding quickly without having taken the time to think through it,
Mhm.
weigh the options, explore the pros and cons. Sometimes we need to cool down
Yeah.
before we have a conversation. But that awareness also trickles into others, being aware of how others may be feeling, what their pain points, motivations, and desires might be, what their vulnerabilities may be, even how they're rewarded. That
Yes.
was one of my best and earliest lessons when I came into large corporate matrix organizations. I realized that every function was rewarded on something slightly different. And while there were some commonalities, there were oftentimes tension
Mm.
between how different functions were rewarded. So all of those things, I like to call those factors underneath the iceberg, the invisible iceberg. What are those factors that drive others? And so that all relates to awareness of self and awareness of others.
I agree. I mean, having worked with P&G as a client, I know how competitive the jobs are, and, the climb and the titles and all of those different things. It's easy to kind of get focused on that. But then I think as you kind of move through the growing pains of leadership, I agree so much. Self-awareness, it's hard work, but it's such an essential place to start. Because like what you said, those triggers, those ways in which you respond, because we respond and we react in the ways that are kind of seated within us, like our kind of deep-seated fears or concerns or whatever. So not knowing like what motivates ourself doesn't give you the emotional intelligence enough to know, oh, this person's not motivated the same way that I am. Maybe, this is a funny thing. I started a company one time and they asked me like, what was my Myers-Briggs? What was my Enneagram, which started me down this whole rabbit hole of Enneagrams. Love them. Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
I am.
Yeah. And then my love language. And I'm like, love language? That seems like an interesting thing to share in the workplace, but it's super important to understand. Do people receive validation from you through like gifts, acts of service, quality time? It's funny. We even had guys in the office, physical touch. They were like, lots of guys, physical touch. They hugged in the morning. They had their bro hugs. Like that is how they showed each other appreciation, admiration, whatever it was. And then, words of affirmation. I think a lot of people are in that space. I mean, I remember when I was younger, I had a boss while I was in college who never said thank you. And it drove me up the wall. It's not that I didn't like the guy, but I did not feel appreciated by him at all. So when he was desperate for me, when I graduated to not leave, I was really floored. I'm like, but you knew I was going to college. I was going to go find another job when I was done. And you never seemed to be appreciative of anything I did while I was here, but he just wasn't a words of affirmation guy, but I was. So definitely knowing and understanding what motivates you is important and what triggers you is important, but what motivates others as well.
I just love that. I've never considered using love languages within the workplace.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to integrate that for sure. One of my favorites is Clifton Strengths.
Yes.
And the reason why I love that particular personality assessment is because it focuses on what's right with you.
Yes.
And not what's wrong with you. Because the reality is each of us are fearfully and wonderfully made. And we each have a unique DNA that makes you, you, and what makes you unique. And so I like Clifton Strengths because it's really easy to understand. I honestly forget which number Enneagram I am.
Yeah.
And it's not always necessarily intuitive. Yeah. But I know from a strengths perspective, my number one strength is achiever. And so that means that I'm going to get stuff done. But the downside or the basement of that is sometimes I burn the candle at both ends. So I like Clifton Strengths because it's easy to understand. It's easy to remember what other strengths are. And then I love how we can create maps to see where the team is more predominant and where there might be some gaps. And I often do trainings with organizations and with new leaders and with new teams, especially around onboarding and new leader assimilations. But I think I'm going to integrate love languages into that because recognition is so important. Yes. And people like recognition in different ways. Some people love public recognition. Some people don't ever want to hear their name over the microphone in a town hall meeting, but everyone wants that higher order benefit of Maslow's around self-actualization and belonging and knowing that what they're contributing and who they are is valued.
Yeah, I agree. I'm so excited you're going to work that in. Yeah, it just makes a difference completely. To your point there, I just literally thought of Steven, one of my former coworkers, who would crawl into a corner and want to just die if you ever said anything nice to him. It's not that he didn't like to hear nice things, but he'd rather you just like write it in a card and leave it on his desk or say it one-on-one versus being in person. So kind of having that awareness of what others prefer and the way in which they prefer it allows you to maximize your ability to have them feel seen and heard and maybe not called out and embarrassed. I mean, it was like painful. He was like writhing in pain. He was sitting in the corner of the wall, like, "No, dude, stop, stop."
That was a great example, Amy, of you recognizing
Mhm.
something in him and a different behavior. I'm not sure if Stephen verbalized that to you or if you recognize it,
It's
but
his
great
body
job
language.
in either organizational awareness, with others, or authentic leadership is also speaking up for yourself and
Mhm.
advocating and saying what's true for you. And
Mhm.
sometimes that also means apologizing. So, for example, if you gave Stephen a shout out, publicly and didn't realize that that was he didn't really like that,
Mhm.
just apologizing.
Yeah.
That makes leaders more sticky and more memorable, and it will make people more endeared to you
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. Because like you said, they feel like they belong. They feel like they're being seen and heard. I love that our chat with our live listeners is got a couple folks in there shouting out their Enneagram numbers: a 7, a 5. I'm a 9. Kristin, you have to go back and figure out what yours is and share it with us. I think it's just such a great tool. It really helps you understand people's deep-seated kind of motivations and fears. And like you said, almost the same with the strengths, where it focuses on what makes like your strengths. It also helps you kind of understand your blind spots. And I think that's like an essential piece of work towards, self-awareness is understanding and learning your blind spots and being more aware of how you show up and
I
perceive
agree.
others.
And with blind spots and opportunities slash weaknesses, whatever you want to call it, early in my life and in my career, I focused on what do I need to do better at, right? And I almost obsessed around what those opportunities are. But I've shifted my philosophy that yes, it's absolutely important to understand what your blind spots are, where you don't yet have deep experience or mastery, or where you have gaps,
Mhm.
whether they are career limiting blind spots or gaps, or whether they're gaps that you just need more experience. However, my philosophy is not to try to transform a weakness into a strength.
Mhm.
My philosophy is to neutralize your opportunity or to neutralize your weakness. And
Mhm.
so, one of the tools that I use in training is a tool I've created called a personal brand audit, where you capture what are your top 5 core values, what are
Mhm.
your towering strengths that have been consistent throughout your life, throughout your career, the things that make you really unique, and what are your strengths. What are your opportunities and how can you neutralize those opportunities? For example, I mentioned that achiever is my number one strength. How I neutralize overworking is through delegation or
Yes.
through building in quiet time. Like Wednesdays are my self-care day and
Good.
Fridays are my no meeting Fridays. So you are a special exception because we are recording this on a Friday.
Right?
But then the other factor is what are your points of difference? And
Mhm.
then what's your kind of elevator pitch in 3 to 7 words? But
That's
my
great.
philosophy is don't try to focus on transforming your weaknesses into a strength. How can you neutralize those opportunities? And that is not only with you, but it's also with the people that you surround yourself with as well.
I love it. That's a great framework. Always love a good framework. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Is that included in your book, The Heart of a Leader?
Yes, it
Ah,
is.
awesome.
Chapter 1 is all about your personal brand. So
Great.
that is in chapter 1. And I do have tools, e-tools, and e-workbook that you can download,
Great.
20 different tools from the book,
Okay.
so that you can edit it and save it for yourself as well.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be sure to get those links and include those in the show notes.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Obviously, when we're in a position of leadership, there's an opportunity to influence positively and negatively, obviously, but hopefully it's all positive. When it comes to influencing others as a leader, regardless of your title, however, right? It's how we show up. It's what we do that makes us a leader, not the title always. What strategies or practices have you found to be the most effective when trying to influence others?
Yeah. The first strategy around influencing others is having a clear vision.
Mhm.
What are we all marching and working toward? And then the second is roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and
Yes.
helping people to see how they fit into the big picture,
Mhm.
how their work, how their experiences are added value enablers, and not just added value enablers, but building blocks in order to achieve that vision. And it goes back to belonging. Tactically, I really like to have one-on-ones with direct reports. When I'm not in a position yet in my company where there's 3 or more levels of leadership, right now it's just 2 levels. But when I was in corporate, I would have periodic one-on-ones with my skip level, because it's important to keep those lines of communication open and engage and develop and build and nurture relationships at all levels. So spending that one-on-one time is important, and creating time for the team. So as a business owner now for almost 4 years, I'm at a place where I've gone from a solopreneur to a team of over 28, from California all the way to India. And in addition to having one-on-ones, and in addition to having project-based team meetings, we also have organization-wide meetings. And it's amazing what we accomplish every month together in those 1-hour meetings, where we remind the team of what our vision is, what our strategies and priorities are. And then I've gone from being a solopreneur to having a team managed company. And so each function is reporting out and sharing the progress, the strategies, what they're working on, recognizing where our wins are, et cetera. So incorporating relationship building, vision, strategy, goals, and metrics, and recognition, those are some of my keys to success when it comes to leading within organizations.
I love it. That's great. Yeah. So many things I feel like in parallel that I've seen and learned over the years, and trying to kind of just fumble my way through learning how to lead and communicate with others effectively. That when you provide transparency, you get transparency in return. Yay.
Isn't that funny?
Crazy. When
the change you want to see.
Right? You show the trust and respect that you have in others, you get it back. And I think, a lot of times, we all kind of, like you said, doing that kind of self-awareness work and understanding, maybe I am hardcore visionary, but I'm not great at the practicality of putting together like project plans, timelines, communications, and things like that to make sure everybody is seeing the end goal that you are seeing. So everybody does feel like they're working towards the same goal, the same opportunity. Like that is what helps drive and motivate people to some degree, at least from a baseline. I think some of the tools that I have leveraged in the past, I don't know if you checked into it or not, but the book Traction and Entrepreneurial Operating Systems.
Yep.
I love my EOS system. When I was even just working as a volunteer board president, that really helped to make our meetings like wide, but not so deep. And we got through so much content in 45 minutes. Our board meetings went from being 2 hours to 45 minutes. And then we can spend the rest of the time if we want to just hang out and shoot in the breeze. But having good systems in place for clear communication, so everybody knows where they are in the process and where they belong and where they fit. I love RACI too. You kind of started to allude to the RACI.
Yep, absolutely.
Accountable, consulted, informed. Also love that system. So anything that just helps bring clear communication and more transparency to the process, it's really just going to help other people feel like they're being brought along. They're not just a cog in the wheel. Nobody wants
Absolutely. I read a book a few months ago called Scaling Up. And it is an amazing book full of not only case studies and examples, but very tactical steps that businesses can take of any size to be able to create rhythms and to be able to create momentum and acceleration with revenue and profit. And one of the many tactics I took away, Amy, was that everyone in the organization needs a number. So if people can see how the work that they're doing ties to revenue, cost of goods, a line item on the budget, the bottom line profit, dilute EPS. I mean, pick your metric. So those are like P&L metrics, but there could be other metrics like lead conversions or all sorts of things. I mean, you can fill in the blank. We have just introduced a ESG scorecard for our organization. We serve a lot of corporations, and ESG is important to them. So that means it's important to us. So we measure and track things like how many flights we take. And for every flight we take, we donate a tree and plant a tree to kind of compensate for the emissions, et cetera. So we measure all of those things. And again, when people can see themselves not only as part of the team culturally, but part of the organization as it relates to the outcomes and the metrics of success, it really drives a strong culture, rhythm, and most importantly, the performance.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That is great. A few moments ago too, you kind of started to allude to your framework for, I'm going to shift back over to the personal brand. You alluded to some of that. Obviously it's an important thing to do as you move through your career, even career pivots, like personal brand and professional brand can go a long way in helping you make those pivots and changes and move up that ladder if that's what you're looking to do. What are some tips and insights that you can share on effectively managing and building a personal brand as a leader?
Sure. I think it really goes back to self-awareness. So we've already mentioned several different personality assessments and tools that you can utilize to understand yourself. The journey towards self-awareness never ends. It is a lifelong journey. The same thing as it relates to emotional intelligence. It's a lifelong journey because the context that you find yourself in on a daily basis, even moving from hour to hour, can absolutely change. So that self-awareness is definitely critical. So that's one aspect. Remind me of the question again.
So I was talking about like insights and ideas for personal brand. Like how do we kind of manage that to effectively manage and build that?
Yeah. The other thing that's important is feedback. And I actually just sent out a monthly newsletter for our list of customers and those who have engaged with our team and our businesses.
Mhm.
And one of the themes was about feedback. And I definitely believe that feedback is a gift. That's one of the 52 emotional intelligence insights that is part of my book.
Yeah.
When you gather feedback, you understand and you can reconcile if the way that you are intending to be from a personal and professional brand is resonating with others.
Yeah.
And sometimes feedback comes in unsolicited, but other times it's important to gather that feedback and be really intentional. And that could be formal or informal. It could be as informal as, what should I start, stop, continue?
Yeah.
What is my towering strength? What do I do better than anyone else? If there were one thing that I focused on, what would take me from good to great? Are there any blind spots that I need to be aware of or course correct? How do I show up? So there are
Those are
so
great
many
questions.
different questions that you can
Yeah.
ask informally. And then, of course, there are formal ways that you can gather feedback, whether it's through a performance review, whether it's through a 360, where you're gathering insights from your manager or from your peers, from your direct reports. And then when it comes to being a business owner, it's important to ask for formal and informal feedback there as well. So having a business and market research, I
Yeah.
definitely have a passion toward gathering insights,
Yep.
both formally and in informal ways as well,
Yeah.
because sometimes our intention isn't aligned with reality, and sometimes it is. And so gathering feedback can help you to strengthen your brand and to validate, are you showing up in the way that you intend to,
Yeah.
or are there some opportunities?
I love it. That's great. And I love those questions because that was going to be the next kind of question that I had was like, what kinds of questions and which ways do you prompt that feedback? Because sometimes it feels hard and awkward for people when you're like, tell me what to start, stop, and continue. But honestly, when you say, tell me what to start, stop, and continue, it gives me a framework at least to kind of start with.
Yeah.
You know, how do I go from good to great? Or, I think And putting that into practice on a regular basis is also showing to others that you allow for feedback, which means you're more likely to get unsolicited feedback in the moments where you don't really think to ask for it. And then you might get something really helpful, really insightful. So
Absolutely.
I love that. Those are great tips because, feedback, like you said, it is a gift. It feels hard and awkward to give and to receive oftentimes, but I had a former boss that once said, I never want you to walk into an annual review and hear feedback that is something that's completely new to you. It should be things we've already talked about. And I think that's one thing, and maybe a lot of a corporate culture is that we save feedback for one time of year in the review process. And it's all kind of focused on what just happened most recently. So if you're soaring and doing great, wonderful. If you're not having such a great time and things are kind of in the dumps, that's going to reflect on your whole stinking year. So
Yes.
being able to kind of manage expectations and allow the opportunity for you to give and others to give you feedback on a more regular basis, I think is just a tremendous practice. So thank you for that advice.
Absolutely. And one other way to demonstrate self-awareness and make that feedback conversation a little easier for others is to point out what you see as your strengths and opportunities for growth. The reason why I say feedback is a gift is because many people don't feel comfortable having that direct conversation. And sometimes you have to add a little sugar to what you're saying if you're giving unsolicited feedback to others. But sharing what you see as your strengths and opportunities is a good way to bridge and to demonstrate that you're not only self-aware, but that you're open to feedback. And that's a bridge that helps others to engage in that important conversation.
Yeah. And to bring it back for a moment to or your own personal board of directors, as you're looking for folks to fit that mold or that space, I look for what Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist who works a lot of Fort, and you probably read or seen some of his stuff, obviously, but talks about disagreeable givers. And that was such an important thing for me to understand and learn. There's this quadrant of folks, and we all kind of sit in this space of agreeable givers, kind of the doormats. We tell everybody what they want to hear. We want everybody to be happy, things to feel peaceful and calm on Enneagram 9. So I'm like, oh, this sounds great. And then you've got your disagreeable takers, which are pretty much the people that are villainous. They disagree just to kind of take the spotlight away, to make others feel shame, whatever it is that they're out to do. And then you've got your agreeable takers, and those guys are sneaky, right? Because they're a little bit oily. They're going to kind of come around and tell you what you want to hear, but really ultimately their motive is to take. But he said the people that you truly need to look for and surround yourself with are the disagreeable givers, the people who will look to disagree with you and tell you what you need to hear, because they have also another great book and an author I've interviewed, Kim Scott, on radical candor. They have this ability to provide radical candor, to tell you in a clear but caring way what you need to know. So learning about disagreeable givers and kind of finding and identifying those folks in my space has been really helpful, because they are always the first. Even if you don't ask them, they're going to give you feedback. But if you ask them, they're still definitely going to give you feedback.
Yeah, I love that. What was that book named by Adam? I haven't heard of it.
It's Givers and Takers, I believe, is what that one's called. Yeah.
I love that. What a great framework.
I know. I love a good quadrant.
Yeah. And those are the dicey parts of relationships. It's necessary to have those conversations, because when people don't have those conversations, it leads to blind spots.
Oh my gosh.
And oftentimes it leads to getting to a glass ceiling that you may not even know exists, which leads to then frustration and tension and all types of negative ripple effects.
Yep. And if you haven't read it yet, also that book I just also mentioned, again, all the
Radical
books.
Candor.
Radical Candor.
Amazing. Yes.
She opens up with that case study about, I think it was Bob or Bill or somebody, and she's just firing him, and it feels terrible because she's never had a bad exchange with him, because she's never given him negative feedback. And so it's coming as a surprise to him. It's tremendously traumatic for her as well, on top of obviously what he's going through. So it just doubles the impact. So yeah, great couple of books there to check out if you all don't have them on your reading list already. All right, we've talked a bit about emotional intelligence, and obviously it's a key aspect to successful leadership. Can you share any stories or examples of how emotional intelligence has impacted your leadership style and the success of your companies?
Yeah. I would definitely mention that example that I talked about earlier around the acquisition and the compare and contrast. I would also say more recently, thinking about my business and the scope of the services we deliver, our superpower up until pretty recently has been qualitative research, which is leading insightful and authentic and enriching conversations with a brand's target audience. And quant is kind of the opposite of that. It is generally survey-based research where you're engaging a wide number of people through usually an online platform. And so I knew that expanding into quant would probably be a necessity, but I recently uncovered some research from an industry perspective around the market share. And I said, oh, we're definitely expanding into quant. But tying this back to EQ, it was being aware that we don't have the skill set, the strength of, and the bench of skill sets within our team.
Yeah.
And in a service-based business, something that's important is redundancy. So I can't depend on only one person because anything could happen at any time.
Yeah.
Capacity, we can have too many customers and clients that we're working with simultaneously, so that limits capacity. Someone could fall ill, vacations, anything could happen. So redundancy is important, but tying it back to EQ, recognizing the vulnerability, recognizing the kind of uneasy feeling that I felt, and then digging deeper into why am I feeling this, and determining what can we do to close this gap. And so since that time, we've brought on a programmer onto our team where all they do is research quant programming, and we're bringing on another researcher who is a PhD who has almost 30 years of experience doing quant research, applied methodology, different studies and survey designs, et cetera. So we're closing those gaps. And I don't feel one bit slighted. I don't feel any less confident
Yeah.
as a leader because I know what my superpowers are. And part of authentic leadership and tapping into emotional intelligence is realizing where your strengths are and where there are gaps in capabilities, and supporting and highlighting and recognizing and embracing others who have different skill sets than you instead of seeing it as something to be threatened by. So that's a more recent example of how and why EQ matters.
I love it. That's great. Well, I think too, I can imagine like bringing in people who are more focused on like the researcher side of things, the more logical and less qualitative, the more quantitative type of research. There's going to be differing of opinions. So there's going to be discussions and things like that. And the last thing you want to allow is ego to get in the way of progress by bringing in new team members with new points of view into a space. It's like you're filling a gap. You recognize and acknowledge the gap is there. And it's easier to allow for it when you've made that call yourself, versus letting ego be the thing that drives it all, because that's just a great way to tank a ship for sure. And then I love what you keep referencing to, and I want to call it out a little bit about like how you're feeling. I think sometimes as, especially women, we kind of tend to push down what we experience within our bodies and numb what happens within our bodies. Yet, where we hold and how we hold tension, pain, and stress, like all these different things show up so differently for us. You kind of keep getting so close to talking about like body and gut. And I just wanted to give a moment to that and say, that's a superpower, like the ability to feel, is a gift and not suppress and numb, and to get curious about it and say, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling threatened? Why am I feeling anxious or nervous or angry even, because that's another thing we're told as women, we're not allowed to be angry. But it's all there and it's all valid and it's for a reason. So I love this aspect of like being self-aware, being in our bodies, recognizing our guts and our feelings and our emotions, as being something worth kind of taking time to look and say more practically, is there something we can do here to make this better?
One of my favorite authors is Susan David. She wrote a book called Emotional Agility. And I referenced it within my book, The Heart of a Leader. And one of the things that she talks about is bottlers and brooders.
Okay.
And these are not necessarily productive ways to handle emotions. So bottlers, they avoid negative emotions by pushing them down, right? Ignoring them so that they can get on with the priorities of the day, with checking things off the list, with staying in, let's say, a happy place or an optimistic aura, or not wanting to be seen as weak. On the other hand, brooders, they get hooked. They get hooked on uncomfortable feelings, emotions, worries, what ifs, and obsessing on feelings that they can't let go of. And so it's important also with self-awareness to recognize kind of what your natural tendency is, because again, EQ is this lifelong journey, and self-management of our emotions is a lifelong journey. I don't necessarily believe that you can control your emotions, nor are emotions bad. Emotions are just data.
Yes.
Data to investigate is what's underneath this that's making me feel this way. The other thing is, and I uncovered this again as I was researching for my book, and there's multiple pages of a bibliography, so it's full of really juicy insights from others, is that identifying just one emotion can reduce that emotion's power over you. So it's important to have a robust emotional vocabulary of what I like to call granular emotions, because there's more than happy, mad, silly, sad. There are literally thousands of emotions, and our vocabulary, we usually only, use the same few emotions. But getting real crystal clear on how you're feeling, it can reduce that emotion's power over you, particularly if it's not a productive emotion.
Yes, I love that so much. Huge about language and naming and giving things the names that we need in order to identify. And you're right, our language is so limited. Gosh, if you guys don't need another book to read from this podcast recording, Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. A tremendous book. I will keep it forever to help myself and my children, who will be teenagers someday, have the language that they need, because even the English language itself, there are other words and other languages and cultures that we don't even have in the English language, because we just lack that ability to identify these complex feelings. One of my favorite ones, I'm going to mispronounce it though, I think it's like called Schadenfreude. And it basically is the feeling that kind of guilty pleasure of seeing something bad happen to someone else when you dislike them. And so like you feel a little bit of schadenfreude. It's like a little bit, you feel like a little bit happy, but then you feel a little guilty for feeling happy. I love that there's a name for that, because nobody wants to admit it, but somebody's had that feeling at some point or another. And like, we don't even have a word for that here in English. So
what was that word called?
I think it was called Schadenfreude, or if somebody is in the chat who wants to correct my pronunciation of it. Yeah, it's so funny. I think the word itself is German, but yeah, it's basically that kind of feeling of like a little bit of vindication, even though or karma. Sometimes when you see karma play out with other people, you're like, oh,
too bad for you.
It essentially means like joy from the misery of others or something like that, which I was like, I don't that sounds terrible. But then when you describe it deeper, you're like, oh, well, maybe.
Been there, done that. Don't want to admit it.
Right?
It's true.
Exactly. But a great book, Atlas of the Heart. If you haven't checked it out, add it to your ever-growing list with us. All right. As the CEO of a global team, how do you create a culture of growth and empowerment within your organization? And I'm really curious about this question, even from like a remote standpoint, because this is still something a lot of people are kind of learning and figuring out as we remain, hybrid and remote in our work environments now.
Absolutely. Growth and empowerment is enabled by aligning people to where their natural superpowers are. So there's a lot of tension that is created, and quite frankly, lower productivity when people are doing work that doesn't align with their skill set, their interests, and their passions. The other thing that creates growth and empowerment is ensuring that you are hiring the right people from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I have this phrase that I actually learned from one of my mentors, which is slow to hire, quick to fire.
Yeah.
I have a philosophy that, you can train someone in how to do the work, but you
Mhm.
can't train for character.
Right.
You can't train for core values. It's
Mhm.
either there or it's not.
Yep.
So growth and empowerment is enabled by the right team. It's
Mhm.
enabled by clarity and aligning people with superpowers. Growth and empowerment is also enabled by feedback and helping people feel part of that collective that is accomplishing the bigger picture goals.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'll say, especially as a business owner, is it's important to think about whether you want to hire someone or bring someone on who is already deep expert and a functional expert in that role, or if you want to train someone to and give them the skills. There are pros and cons to each, but what I've found are there are some trade-offs. The trade-offs of hiring people who are deep experts is you're going to pay more, but the benefit is generally you get better quality work. You may be able to charge more for that service because of the breadth of the team. And it's going to usually be faster with less oversight
Yeah.
for you and hand holding as a manager, leader, or executive.
Mhm.
On the other hand, when you hire people who have the capacity
Mhm.
and the interest, but they don't have the capability yet, it requires more training. It
Mhm.
requires spending more time with them. It requires more support and a
Mhm.
little bit more hand holding and encouragement and feedback along the way. So, those are two different approaches. Each of them can lead to growth and empowerment. I would
Mhm.
say those who are more seasoned and experienced, their growth and empowerment, I think, comes of being able to explore, being
Mhm.
able to recommend, being able to innovate, being able to level up the outcomes and the approach and the how. Innovation, I think, is important even for those who are less skilled or less experienced. But I think growth and development for that group of people, employees, coworkers, et cetera, comes from encouragement, comes from acknowledging when they've mastered different skill sets. It comes from recognition and celebration. And so there are just different nuances um, between, I would say, the two different types
Yeah.
of team members.
That's so interesting. I love it that you kind of just in my brain as you were talking about that, the model of good, fast, and cheap popped in my head, which is usually applied to branding. And we're talking to clients. We're like, look, you can have two of these three on this pyramid, good, fast, or cheap. Kind of works the same when you're looking at bringing on talent, it might be a little less expensive, but they're going to be a little bit slower. If they're more expensive, the things might get done faster and they might get done better. So that's really interesting. I never thought to apply that in that sense. And then I also wanted to add, I have heard the hire slow, hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, it's that could be like a whole nother conversation in itself too, because it is a tricky and dicey space to be in as a business owner. And it's never necessarily like the most fun part of being a business owner. But one other piece of framework, because I had a mentor who gave me that same kind of similar statement, but also added on this kind of structure of when you're looking at and evaluating an employee, really kind of consider based on what the issue is it a skill, hill, or will issue? If
Mm,
it's a skill, like you said, you can fix it.
mhm.
Skill, it's a matter of additional training, some extra time, love, and attention. If it's a hill, that could be something that is like slowing them down. Maybe it's an interpersonal issue. Maybe it's a personal issue with something at home that you don't have insight or awareness to, but it could just be a temporary hill, something that they just need to get up and over. But that's something that once it's identified, or at least it's something short term. The thing where it's like you're trying to decide if it's a fireable offense, it's like if it's the will, if they're like they have the skill, there is no hill, it is purely will. Outside of other things you need to kind of work into factors when you're looking at how you're staffing and who's on your team. Skill, hill, or will I found to be really, really helpful.
I love that. You were full of wisdom and frameworks. I just love it,
Right?
Amy.
Same. You
Yes.
know what? I get it from all of my amazing guests like you and the amazing mentors and my personal board of directors. I tell you what, it's all worth it. It's all coming in from the outside. Our hour has flown by so fast, Kristin. I want to ask you one more question, but before I do that, I'm going to just give a moment and let our live listening audience take a second and think about any questions that they might want to ask. Add it to the chat. I'm going to ask my last question of Kristin. And if there's no other questions in the chat, then we will wrap it up and call it a day. But this has been so amazing, Kristin. Again, I feel like we should just have you back so we can talk more, or we'll just hang out sometime. I don't know. This has been a lot of fun.
Likewise.
Like you said, the self-awareness aspect of things is a lifelong journey, and so is leadership. How do you, as a leader, continue to evolve and grow? And what steps do you take to ensure that your personal and professional development are staying on track?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've always had a passion for personal development. I am one of the first people who's going to sign up for a course, who's going to sign up for being a mentee, who is going to offer being a mentor. A couple things. One is believing that everyone can teach and everyone can learn. I've learned so many things from what you shared today, Amy. I have some new books that I need to read and podcasts that I need to listen to and TED Talks. So that's one. Everyone can teach and everyone can learn. Number two is being a lifelong learner. There can be sometimes infatuation with learning new things. And I've had to also balance implementing what I've learned. So I'm a certified women business. I'm a certified minority business through WeBank and through National Minority Supplier Development Council. One of the benefits of being certified within those organizations, and even for those who aren't certified, there are so many educational opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
There was a couple of weeks ago that I signed up for a webinar. And when I looked at my calendar, I had the capacity to attend, but it was a 4-part series. And I realized I haven't taken action on the insights I gained from the last session. So I am not going to attend today's session. I'm going to focus on implementation. And so as it relates to continual learning, growth, and development, it's finding those 1 or 2 key takeaways and translating that into action.
Yeah.
And that's part of what our brand and value proposition is at Driven to Succeed, is that we uncover and then translate insights into so what and now what. And so that's important when it comes to your personal growth and development. And the last thing that I'll share is, and it goes back to personal and professional branding, determine what it is that you want to be known for, and take a pulse every so often to revisit what your desire is and where you want to go and any gaps that you have. One thing, and I'll leave you with this, is as you grow within your respective career, or if you're an executive of a growing business, I don't like to say small business because I like to think from a business enterprise perspective to scale. Part of your success is not what you accomplish. Part of your success as a leader is what you help others to accomplish as it relates to their personal and professional development, as it relates to their outcomes, their mastery of different skill sets, et cetera. And so the goal shifts over time from you as an individual contributor to ultimately both you and how you enable others.
Yes. Oh my God. I feel that so deeply. Kristin, thank you so much for ending that on such a fantastic note, with a lot of wisdom to that, because leading isn't just the opportunity to have a title or a salary. It's the opportunity to leave a legacy.
Yes.
I love that. I love what you're building and I love what you're doing. Thank you so much for jumping on with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to get to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you to the Together Digital organization.
course. Yeah, we're so happy to be here and so happy to be able to introduce wonderful people like you with great frameworks and great advice to the community. Because like you said, it's all about helping empower others. So I hope you all take some actionable steps from today's conversation. I know we left you with a lot of good information. So check over your notes and take some action on not just leading, but leaving that legacy. Thanks again, Kristin. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great
Thanks.
one,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye.